3, and on this demo we're going to talk about compressors, using compressors. Um, and I really would recommend that you go back and read that section on compressors from our Intro to Effects, um, just to kind of refresh. I'm going to use some terminology from that in this demo. So again, compressors is just another audio effect. Their main purpose is to try and control dynamics. Um, sometimes when you're recording stuff in the studio, things can be really loud at times and not really quiet at other times, especially singers because they move around a lot when they're singing. And as they get closer to the mic, it gets louder, and as they get further away from the mic, it gets quieter. Sometimes they sing louder, sometimes they sing quieter, and a little bit of that is good, of course. But too much of it can really be distracting, and because we generally tend to record things with the microphones really close to the sound source, um, those differences when things get louder or quieter are exaggerated just by nature of how those microphones work. And so compressors kind of help even out um, those differences and those dynamic differences, right? I'm just going to show you a couple compressors and how I would use them on some things. The first thing that I really comes to mind is Megan's vocals. I want to compress just to try and make that performance a little bit more smooth throughout. There's times where it gets really loud and then other times where it's a little bit quiet. So hopefully a compressor will help us out with that a little bit. So I went ahead and just selected my compressors, and again, you've got some presets in here that we're going to try right off the bat. Let me show you. Let's do classical compression. Okay, so I'm just going to click on that, drag it over to Megan's vocal, and we did already EQ her, by the way. And just a thing to kind of keep in mind, depending on where you put the compression is really going to change how it interacts with the vocal. Since it's after the EQ, these changes in the EQ are going to affect the compressor, and you can do them in different orders. So I could do the compression first, and then EQ it, and you might just want to play around with that just to see how it works. Generally, I'm not going to be doing boosting before a compressor. Usually I'll do my boosting EQ after the compressor, but since these are pretty mellow boosts, I think I'll keep it for now and just see how it works. So here's our compressor, and there are some different views with it. Depending on which one you load in, it might look totally different, but it's all the same EQ. So the first thing I want to do is just show you these different views. We've got this view that came in on this one, which is 2 lines. I'm going to go ahead and solo her and just play this so you can kind of see. I'll turn it down so you can see, like, this is her vocal line coming in, and the blue line is our threshold, so that's where the compressor is going to turn on. So anytime her voice goes over that blue line, the compressor turns on. And when the compressor turns on, that yellow line is the compressor, and that's how much it is turning down the vocal just in that spot, right? So you can really see this screen. I really love because you get to see exactly when the compressor is turning on. You get to see what's causing it to turn on, so what part of her voice is that way. And so we can change that in real time, right? So a lot of the controls are kind of hidden in this view too. So again, there's a little arrow right here that you can click on, and it'll kind of open up some options here. This is going to open up some other things that I don't really want to get into though. So for this demo, I'm going to keep it off. Right. So let's look at some of the other views real quick. So there's this view, and I kind of like this one too because again, you're seeing when she sings, that's the moving yellow ball, and this bigger yellow ball is that threshold. So that's like, when is the compressor going to turn on? So you can decide like to have it always on, basically, if it's down here, or maybe just occasionally on when she gets really loud right there, right? So you can move the threshold that way. And then your readout here, here's your threshold. This is her singing. And again, that you can also adjust the threshold this way, right? And then that's your output level. Okay. Then the third view is this one, probably the most simple. And this one just has the threshold right here. The orange will be when the compressor turns on, and then this is your output volume right here. Okay. So, depending on what you're doing, like all of these are doing the same thing, but this is just giving you different information, right? So generally for a vocal compressor, I like to kind of always keep it on and keep it kind of smooth on the ratio. So this ratio is really low, 1.27 to 1. I'm going to go up to about 3 just to give us a good strong compression amount. Um, yeah, so you can kind of see that's leaning pretty heavy on her voice as she's singing. And one thing to kind of look at, if you look at like, here's the voice coming in, and you can see it's like pretty fluctuating pretty big over here, right? Between the quietest and the loudest moments. This is it coming out, and you can see that it's staying in a much more narrow band there and really staying a lot more consistent throughout that whole part. So that's kind of what you're looking for. You don't want to totally squash with the compressor, like, so don't turn your ratios up so much or your threshold down so much that this doesn't ever move, because that's just not going to sound good. Um, but mess around with your threshold and your ratio, especially, just to get a sound that you like. And if you want to uh, go into some more advanced things, you can adjust the attack and the release. Attack, again, is how fast the compressor turns on when it crosses the threshold. And release is how fast it turns off once it goes below the threshold. And a lot of these knobs, especially when you're first starting out, it's going to be a real subtle thing. You probably won't hear what it does even if you max it out or take it the other way, right? This is something that you really have to listen carefully for and be really patient with to learn these finer details here. So in the beginning, I'm going to say stick to presets and really just work with threshold and ratio, because those are going to be the things that I think you recognize right off the bat. And you will hear that the sound gets a lot louder typically when you start compressing, and that's because this makeup is on. And what makeup does is it adds extra gain compared to how much you're compressing it. So the more you compress it, the more makeup gain it's adding. And so a lot of times, especially if you're listening through not great headphones and you're new to mixing, you might trick yourself into thinking, well, it's getting louder, so that's better. And that's not generally a good way to think about it. Remember, when we were first talking about the mixing, if you want something louder, a better way to do that or get there is to actually turn the other things down, right? So be careful when you're working with compression. Just like EQ, a little bit goes a long way. And how you use it with different instruments can really vary. But for this assignment, I want you to compress at least 2 things. And some good candidates would be the vocals, of course. Violin might be another great one. Bass is usually one that I'm compressing. Same with the kick and the snare, usually get compression. So you can mess around with those different ones, and you'll see in the compressor list here there's some different things that might match those things. Like there's an acoustic kick compressor specifically, right? So that's obviously going to work good on the kick, and there's an acoustic one which is meant for acoustic guitars. This de-esser is specifically for vocals, because sometimes the S sound really stands out in different microphones, and so you can try that if there's really loud S's in your vocals. There's a snare compressor right there. So lots of good presets for some different instruments on here that you can mess around with. That's it for this one.